Kola was a man on the edge, struggling to keep his family afloat. At 28, he had spent his entire life in Munshi, one of Lagos' roughest neighborhoods, where survival was a daily battle. His father's death, when Kola was just a boy, had thrust him into the role of a provider, a burden that grew heavier with each passing year. His mother, Mama Tia, was a strong woman, but even her unyielding determinations couldn't shield them from the harsh realities of poverty. She worked tirelessly, taking on any job she could find, washing clothes, cleaning houses, selling food by the roadside, but despite her efforts, they were always on the brink of hunger, and the pressure on Kola to contribute weighed on him like a milestone. Tia, Kola's younger sister, was his only light in the darkness. At 21, she was bright and full of dreams, determined to escape the circle of poverty that had trapped their family. She wanted to go to university to build a better life for herself and their mother, but dreams required money, money that Kola couldn't seem to provide, no matter how hard he worked. One evening, after another long day of fruitless job searching, Kola found himself in a dingy bar at Agege. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and alcohol and cigarette smoke. Kola sat at a worn wooden table, nursing a cheap beer, his mind clouded with frustration and despair. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing his family and he was trapped in a circle of poverty with no way out. As he sat there, lost in thought, Kola overheard a conversation at the next table. Two men, rough and around the edges, were talking in low voices about something that piqued his interest. Easy money if you're not afraid to take risks. The one chance hustle, quick cash. Kola knew about the one chance hustle gang that posed as bus drivers and conductors, picking up unsuspecting passengers and robbing them at gunpoint. It was a dangerous and illegal way to make money, but the lure of quick cash was tempting. Kola tried to push the thought away, but they lingered, feeding on his desperation. Later that night, as Kola walked through the dark streets of Munshi, the idea dawned on him. Could he really do this? Could he join a gang, commit crimes, and risk everything to provide for his family? The thought of his mother's disappointment and Tia's unfulfilled dreams weighed heavily on him. But so did the fear of counting down the path he was on, a path that led nowhere. The next morning, after a sleepless night, Kola made a decision. He couldn't keep watching his family suffer. If joining the one chance gang was the only way to make real money, then he had to take that chance, no matter the cost. Kola returned to the bar that evening, his heart pounding as he approached the two men from the night before. They looked up as he neared the expression, wary but curious. "I want in," Kola said, his voice steady, despite the fear gunning at his inside. The older of the two men, a blurry figure with a scar running down his cheek, studied Kola for a moment before nodding. "You know what you're getting into?" he asked, his tone serious. Kola nodded, though in truth he had no idea what lay ahead. All he knew was that he couldn't turn back now. "I know," he replied, "I'm ready." With those words, Kola took his first step into the criminal underworld. It was a decision driven by desperation, a choice that would change the course of his life forever. As he left the bar that night, a cold wind blew through the streets of Lagos, signaling the darkness that was about to consume him. Kola gripped the steering wheel of the rickety danfo bus. The engine sputtered to life, and the vehicle shuddered as if he sensed the dark mission ahead. This was Kola's first job with the One Chance Gang, and the weight of what he was about to do pressed heavily on his mind. Jide, the gang leader, sat in the back, his cold eyes fixed on Kola. Jide was a man of few words, but immense authority. His face bore the scars of countless battles, and his presence demanded obedience. Kola could feel Jide's gaze on him. assessing whether the new recruit had what it took to survive in this dangerous world. Just drive, Jide had instructed earlier. His voice a low growl will handle the rest. The plan was simple. Pick up passengers at a busy bus stop, blend in with the city chaotic traffic, and once the bus was in motion, rob them. The passengers would be left stranded at a deserted road, far from help. Kola's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he maneuvered the bus through the congested streets of Lagos, his mind racing with fear and doubt. At the Ojota bus stop, they picked up their passengers, a middle-aged woman, a worn-out handbag, a young man with AirPods, and an elderly man with a cane. They boarded the bus without a second thought, unaware of the danger they had just stepped into. Kola avoided their eyes as they handed over their fate. Guilt gunning at him, but he reminded himself why he was doing this. His family needed the money. Once the bus was back on the road, the atmosphere inside shifted. Jide gave a slight nod to the others, and the plan was set into motion. The gang members sprang into actions, their face hardened with resolve. Jide was the first to move, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Everyone, lie down!" Jide backed, brandishing a knife that gleamed in a dim light. The passengers froze, terror flashing across their face as they realized the situation they were in. Kola's stomach churned as he listened to their cries of fear. The young man tried to resist, but a quick punch from one of the gang members silenced him. The middle-aged woman whimpered as her handbag was snatched away, and the elderly man, too frail to fight, simply closed his eyes, his body trembling. The robbers were over in minutes, though to Kola it felt like an eternity. They took everything, money, phones, jewelries, and once the bus was emptied of its spoils, Kola drove them to a deserted road on the outskirts of the city. The passengers, stripped of their belongings and dignity, were pushed out of the bus and left to fend for themselves. Kola didn't look back as he sped away, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. The adrenaline that had kept him focused during the job began to fade, leaving him behind a gunning emptiness. He had crossed a line, but he told himself it was necessary. His family needed the money, and this was the only way he could provide it. Back at their hideout, at a discreet building hidden in the alleys of Lagos, the gang gathered to divide their spoils. Kola's share wasn't much, but it was more than he had made in weeks of honest work. He quickly sent most of it home, ignoring his mother's question about where the money had come from. The relief on her face was enough to quiet the doubt gnawing at his conscience, but the relief was short-lived. The jobs became more frequent, the robberies more violent. What had started as a means to an end quickly became a way of life, and Kola found himself slipping further into darkness. The fear that had gripped him during the first job began to fade, replaced by numbness. The cries of terrified passengers no longer echoed in his mind. The sight of pleading eyes no longer haunted his dreams. Jide, sensing Kola's potential, began to trust him with more responsibility. Kola was no longer just the driver. He was involved in planning the jobs, deciding who to target and how to execute the robberies. The gang operation expanded and Kola climbed the rank, his loyalty to the gang growing stronger with each successful job. But with success came greater risks. Jide was not content with petty theft. He wanted more. The gang began kidnapping, targeting people who could fetch a high ransom. Kola's role in these operations was significant, but he justified it by telling himself it was all for his family. The money was good, and with each job, his sense of guilt dulled a little more. Then came the day Jide introduced something darker: rituals. The gang had been approached by a powerful man who offered them a lucrative deal. The catch, it involved human sacrifice. Kola was horrified, but by now he was in too deep. The fear of what would happen if he refused kept him bound to the gang. even as his conscience screamed at him to walk away. The first ritual job targeted a young woman. Kola was to drive the bus, picking her up with other passengers and taking them to a deserted location where the ritual will be performed. He knew it was wrong, knew it was out of line, knew it was a line he should never cross, but the money was too good, the fear too great. The night was unusually quiet as Kola sat in the back of the van, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and resignation. The ritual job was in motion, and Kola knew that this night would change everything. He had crossed many lines before, but this one felt different. Irreversible, the gang, led by Jide, had targeted a young woman who would be the centerpiece of the ritual. Kola's task was simple: drive the van, get them from point A to point B without incident, and ensure no one escaped. As they approached a busy bus stop in Ikeja, Kola's hands trembled on the steering wheel. The city was still alive, each street lit by the glow of street light and passing cars, but for Kola, everything seemed distant, like a dream from which he couldn't wake. The target, a young woman, stepped onto the bus, her face briefly illuminated by the dim light inside. Kola's stomach twitched as he watched her take his seat. She was around Ty's age, and something about her, demure, a blend of innocence and determination, reminded him of his sister. He tried to shake off the thought, to focus on the task at hand, but the unease ground at him. The bus, filled with other passengers, unaware of the fate that awaited them. The gang members, positioned strategically among the seats, exchanged subtle nods, ready to strike. As the bus moved deeper into the city, the tension inside palpably. The unusual hum of conversations faded into an uncomfortable silence, and Kola's pulse quickened. He knew the signal was coming, knew that Jide would soon give the order that would set everything into motion. When it came, it was swift and brutal. Now Jide barked, his voice slicing through the air. The gang member leaped into actions, their movement precise and deadly. The passengers were caught off guard, their cries of fear quickly silenced by threats and blows. Kola kept his eyes on the road, trying to block out the chaos unfolding behind him. But as he glanced into the rear view of the mirror, something caught his eye, a glint of silver on a young woman's wrist. His heart stopped. It was a bracelet, a simple silver bracelet with a small charm. The small bracelet that Tia had worn since she was a child. Kola's breath caught in his throat as he realized the horrifying truth. The girl on the bus wasn't just any target. She was Tia. No, Kola whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. Panic surged through him as he turned sharply in his seat, his eyes wide with terror. Stop! Stop! They ignored him as he drove the bus. But the gang was already too deep into the operation. Jide, focused on completing the ritual, ignored Kola's cries. The young woman, Tia, was dragged from her seat, her scream piercing the air as she was forced out of the bus as they had gotten to the location. Kola's mind raced as he thought a chaotic jumble of fear and desperation. He had to do something, had to stop this madness before it was too late. He stepped out of the vehicle and rushed to the gang who were already taking Tia inside as the ritual had started. Kola kept shouting for them to stop, but Jide was relentless, his grip on Tia unyielding as he prepared for the ritual. Sensing something was wrong, closed in around Kola, blocking him from intervening. Let her go, Kola shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. He lunged forward, but Jide's men held him back. Their grip was tight and unforgiving. Tia's eyes met his, wide with fear and confusion, and Kola's heart shattered. In the chaos that followed, Kola fought with all his might, struggling to reach Tia before it was too late. But his efforts were in vain. One of the gang members, either oblivious to Kola's desperation or simply following orders, completed the ritual. The knife descended its blade, lightning in the dim light as it plunged into Tia's chest. The time seemed to stop. Kola's scream of anguish filled the building, drowning out everything else. He watched helplessly as the life drained from Tia's eyes, her body crumbling to the floor. His sister, the one person he had vowed to protect, was gone. The rage that followed was unlike anything Kola had ever felt. It consumed him, a white-hot fury that obliterated all reason. He turned to Jide with a savage intent, his grief and guilt fueling every blow. The fight was brutal, chaotic, a blow of fists, knives and blood. Kola's strength, fueled by his need for vengeance, overwhelmed Jide. In a matter of moments, the gang leader lay lifeless on the ground, his blood pooling around him. But Kola didn't stop. The rage still burned within him, and he turned on the other gang members, each strike a release of agony, tearing him apart. When it was over, the building was eerie silent. The bodies of his former comrades lay scattered around him, and Kola stood amidst the carnage. His breath ragged his hands stained with blood. He looked down at Tia's lifeless body, his heart breaking all over again. She was gone and it was his fault. With trembling hands, Kola gently lifted Tia's body from the floor of the building. The reality of what had happened began to sink in. Each step he took away from the building, feeling heavier than the last. He had nowhere to go, no plan, just an overwhelming need to give his sister the rest she deserved. Kola carried Tia through the deserted street, the city now eerily quiet in the early hours of the morning. He walked for what felt like hours, a small clearing by a rundown church on the outskirts of the city. It was a forgotten place, hidden away from the chaos of Lagos, a place where he would finally lay Tia to rest. With his bare hands, Kola dug a grave beneath a large tree. The task was slow, grueling, and he didn't care. He needed to do this for Tia, needed to atone in some small way for the choices that had led them both to this point. When the grave was deep enough, he gently laid her body inside, covering it with earth as tears streamed down his face. Kola knelt by the grave, his body whacked with sobs. He whispered, his voice breaking, "I'm so sorry." The only sound in the stillness of the early morning. Kola stayed there for hours, unable to leave, unable to tear himself away from the sister he had lost. But as the first light of dawn began to break, he knew he had to move. He couldn't stay here forever. The authorities would soon come looking for those responsible for the night's bloodshed, and he couldn't afford to be caught. But even as he forced himself to stand, to take one step after another, from the grave, Kola knew that nothing would ever be the same. He had crossed a line from which there was no return, and the weight of his choices would haunt him for the rest of his days. The journey ahead was uncertain, and Kola was a man without purpose, without direction. All he knew was that he couldn't go back to the life he had known, couldn't face the people he had once loved. He was a shadow now, a ghost in the city of Lagos, wandering aimlessly through the darkness in search of something he might never find. Kola couldn't bring himself to return home, too ashamed to face his mother. He knew she would be desperate for news of Tia, but how could he tell her that her daughter was gone because of him? The guilt weighed on him heavily, making each step more difficult than the last. One evening, after days of wandering, Kola found himself back at the small rundown church where he had buried Tia. The air was still and silent, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the trees above. Kola stood by the unmarked grave, staring down at the earth, his heart aching with sorrow. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The wind seemed to carry his words away, offering no comfort in return. The thought of facing his mother filled him with dread, but he knew he couldn't run forever. He made the difficult journey back to Munshi. When Kola finally stepped through the door of his family home, his mother's relief at seeing him quickly turned to horror as he told her what had happened. The truth shattered her, and Kola saw the full extent of the pain he had caused. They were left with nothing but their shared grief, two broken souls struggling to find a way forward. The days that followed Kola's confession were filled with a heavy, suffocating silence. The vibrant energy of their home in Munshi had vanished, replaced by the weight of loss and guilt. Kola's mother moved like a shadow, her once indomitable spirit broken by the tragedy that had claimed both her children, one lost to death, the other into the darkness of crime. Kola stayed close to home, the reality of his actions bearing down on him like a crushing force. He could barely eat or sleep, haunted by memories of Tia and the life they had shared. The guilt ground on him, relentless, reminding him of his failure at every turn. One evening, Kola's mother finally broke the silence. Her voice was weak, but her words were filled with wisdom of someone who had endured more than her share of suffering. Kola, she said, her eyes filled with tears, we cannot stay like this. Tia would not want us to be consumed by our grief. We have to find a way to live for her sake. Kola looked at his mother, feeling the full weight of her words. She was right. Tia wouldn't have wanted them to lose themselves in sorrow. But how could they move forward when the past was so heavy? How do we do that, Mama? Kola asked, his voice barely a whisper. How do we live after everything that happened? We start by forgiving ourselves, she replied, her voice steady despite the tears. We made mistakes, but we have to believe that we can still do good in this world. Kola knew she was right, but forgiveness seemed impossible. The burden of guilt was too great, and the path ahead was uncertain. But for his mother, for Tia, he knew he had to try. In the days that followed, Kola began taking small steps towards healing. He reached out to the families of those he had wronged, offering what little he could in a way of apology and restitution. Each act was a step towards redemption, a way to honor Tia's memory by trying to live a life she would have been proud of. Kola also returned to the small church where he had buried Tia. It became a place of solace for him, a quiet spot where he would reflect and remember. He visited, often bringing flowers and sitting in silence, talking to Tia as if she were still with them. One day, as he knelt by her grave, Kola made a promise to his sister, a vow to find redemption, to live a life that would strive to bring some light into the darkness he had once embraced. I'll never forget you, Tia, he whispered, his voice carried away by the breeze. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I have done. I'll live for both of us. As the months passed, Kola's guilt began to ease, though it never fully disappeared. He took up work with a local charity, helping young people in Munshi avoid the same mistakes he had made. He shared his story, not as a warning, but as a proof that change was possible. Standing on the crowded streets of Lagos one day, watching the world move around him, Kola realized that he had found a way to move forward. The journey to redemption was far from over, but he was ready to continue, step by step, in search of the light that still existed in the world, even for someone like him. The end.
Thank you so much for watching till the end. Please click on the subscribe button to support us, turn on the post notification to get notified when I upload a new story, like, share, and comment your thoughts. Till then, bye.